Happen. All right. Hello and welcome. My name is Angelica. I am the director of the Specialized Center for Stuttering, and I am very, very excited because I am here today with Katie. Hi, Katie. Welcome. And how are you?
Hi, thank you. I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be here with you today. Should I introduce myself now?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So my name is Dr. Katie Winters. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of Cincinnati in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a professor who teaches courses in stuttering as well as research methods, but I'm also trained as a speech language pathologist, and I worked as a speech language pathologist for several years before pursuing my doctorate and becoming a professor.
Thank you so much for that presentation and very impressive curriculum. I am very happy because, well, in general, it's always nice to see you, but that the conversation of today is going to be focused on stuttering in preschool kids. So we are going to share for the next 20 minutes a bit about the treatment and some myths that are there too. So first of all, let's start with a very general question. Why is therapy important in preschool kids who stutter?
Right. I mean, therapy, preschool and kindergarten age is my area of clinical and research expertise and interest. So I'm really glad that we get to talk about this topic together. Therapy for preschoolers is really important because it's the first opportunity we have to teach them about what stuttering is and learn from them about what stuttering feels like and what they think about their stuttering. And it's also the first chance that we can talk to families and specifically parents and siblings about what stuttering is, how to talk about stuttering, and how they can support their preschooler who stutters to communicate everything that they want to share and develop a neutral or positive feeling about their stuttering.
Yeah. And that is very important because I feel like, as you were saying, it's a lot about they feel okay with themselves. And this is key because preschool kids are in a range of age in which some of them continue to stutter and some of them stop doing it. And there is always this, I think that there are many, many questions here because it's like, how do I know if my kid continues or not? What kind of treatment should I provide? So there are many areas that we can explore more on here. And I think that I would like to start giving some first general information for those maybe parents that are seeing this and they have no idea how it works and they're like, wait, my kid can't stop stuttering. So can you share a bit of general information about what percentage of kids stop doing it, why this happens, and things like that?
Absolutely. So to kind of go back, right? When we think about preschool stuttering, children begin to stutter usually between the ages of 2 and 6 years old, which is a really wide age range when we can first observe stuttering. And some children begin stuttering in a way that's really apparent and observable right from the start. And other children have more of a build up to stuttering where parents or other family members start to notice and think like, there's something atypical or unexpected about the way that my child is talking, right? And so the first question that families and us as speech language pathologists might want to answer is this really stuttering or is this something that's typical for all children? And what we know is that all children can be typically disfluent and repeat phrases or say things like or but only children who stutter are going to have these repetitions or prolongations of sounds or blocks where the child appears to be stuck when they're talking. And between 5 and 10% of preschool age children will begin to stutter in a way that fits this stuttering criteria. And then interestingly, of that, let's say 10%, right, about 80% of those children will not continue to stutter as they get older, which means 20% will continue to stutter until later school age or teenage years or adulthood.
Yes, and this is very important because that can create a lot of confusion between professionals and also with parents, of course. I think that for many years there has been this focus on I'm gonna take I mean from the part of the speech and language pathologists, but also from the parents of which of course I don't blame the parents, but there is this message in the field that sometimes I think has been getting confused or not well understood, and this idea of bring your kid to therapy when these are preschool kids, because then it has more chances that a stuttering will go away with the therapy.
Mhm.
What can you say to us about that?
Well, it's always a really interesting discussion to have with parents. And it's also a really interesting discussion to have with students because they'll ask the same thing. When I'm working as a speech language pathologist, what's my goal for therapy? And if children come to therapy earlier or later, what does that have to do with whether or not they continue to stutter? And what the research literature shows us is that with or without treatment, right? 80% of children who begin to stutter will not necessarily continue to do so, but 20% will. And we don't know which of the 20% will continue to stutter or not. And now I think I'm blanking on your original question, but this idea of, oh, if we take children to therapy, are they more or less likely to continue? I got it. I'm with you. We really just don't know, right? And part of the reason we don't know is because of the way intervention research measures outcomes for therapy for preschoolers. And part of the reason we don't know is just because we don't have enough research to really systematically answer that question. A lot of times, research studies will ask a clinician to rate how much stuttering they hear at one time point, or they'll ask the parent how much they're noticing the child stuttering at home, usually at like one time point or across a couple of different time points. And what we've learned about stuttering over the last few decades, and probably before that, but not as many of us have known about it, is that stuttering's a lot more than what we hear as the listener. And so, of the available preschool data, right, we have a measure of whether or not people keep hearing stuttering, but we don't know if those children are feeling negatively about their speech, if they're avoiding stuttering, if they're talking less, which means they might not have the opportunity to be stuttering as much. So we have a lot of question marks about that type of intervention. But ultimately, what it comes back to for me, if I evaluate a new family or if I'm teaching my students, is we know that there are things we can do that are beneficial to the child and the family when they're preschoolers. So we recommend that they attend in order to work on those things.
Exactly. And that is really important because that is connected to what you were saying at the beginning. It is a lot of communication. It's a lot of help the kid to be a better communicator, to feel good with themselves. And they are in the age where we don't know if they're gonna continue or not. But here is important of okay, I don't need to wait until I see how this goes. It's like I can start working with this kid and help this kid to be a good communicator. And if the kid stops stuttering in the journey, then okay, nothing happened. We haven't hurt that kid. But if the kid continues, then we will have done a really nice job with that kid and the family too.
Exactly. I totally agree.
And in this journey of also working on improving the communication in these kids and also how they feel about themselves, of course there are a lot of fears that come from parents, which are completely understandable. And I think it is really common and normal to see parents that share concerns like they don't want for a speech therapist to point they're stuttering or to mention the word or to talk about that in front of him because there is this fear that maybe that could make them stutter more, or make the stutter to stay with them. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I very much understand when parents ask these types of questions, right? Should I not bring attention to stuttering? Is that going to make it worse? Is that going to make my child self-conscious? And all of that comes from really societal stuttering stigma, right? If society has at baseline a negative view of stuttering, if a child is stuttering, the parent's going to be concerned that that child might feel negatively about stuttering too. We also have, family physicians and pediatricians whose older training said that they should wait and see if the child stops stuttering, and we shouldn't draw attention to stuttering because of those reasons that you talked about already. Um, but all of that is really kind of separate from what we know about kids and child development, right? So children are smart. I'm not a parent, I am an aunt. Um, but my time with preschoolers really tells me like those preschoolers pick up on everything that's happening in the room. And if we ignore stuttering, they pick up and might think or feel a certain way about that. If we look at the really developmental psychology literature, we look at things like social cognition. We know that children as young as 18 months old know when their parent is upset about something, even if the parent isn't visibly showing signs of being upset. So if parents are withholding talking about stuttering, or if other adults in their environment are uncomfortable with stuttering but not talking about it overtly, those children are still potentially going to pick up on those thoughts and feelings, and that can have a negative impact on the child.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also just like you were saying, is like we don't want for kids to have that message of I shouldn't talk about this topic.
Mhm.
Because the kids they are gonna talk about that topic one day anyway. It is better that they do it in a safe space with mom, with dad, um, at home, rather than maybe they are a bit older and then another kid makes a joke that make them feel sad or confused. And so a lot is about let's help the kid, let's talk with the kid about it. And also I think it's important to explain because we mentioned to talk about the kid about that, to talk to the kid about that. It is not like we are gonna sit the kid, like the 4 years old kid in front of the table and start to explain these are like things like that. It's I mean we even kind of start with phrases spontaneously in the conversation, and little by little as they grow up to develop this message, this healthy message, so they feel okay with themselves.
Mhm.
I think I hear one of the phrase, I don't know if it was Chris Constantine or Vivian Siskin, but um let's make the kids to feel okay with themselves and not to struggle with a part of themselves.
Yeah, I love the way that you said that. And it's interesting because adults have a lot of influence on what children think and what they feel. And if we talk about stuttering in a way that's neutral or a way that's positive, then students, our clients or our preschoolers will be able to feel neutrally or positively about stuttering. And I think we've had this shift in school age and teenage and adult stuttering therapy where speech language pathologists are more open-minded to dismissing a medical model where the goal is to stop stuttering, and they're more accepting of a more disability affirming or stuttering affirming approach where it's okay to stutter. And what I'm hopeful for is that for speech language pathologists, we can take that approach and apply it to our preschool years too. Because otherwise, what we end up with is speech language pathologists who want to make stuttering go away until preschool is over, and then it's okay to stutter. And how confusing it must be for preschoolers who age through that really contrasting experience.
Yeah, totally. Just imagine, I don't know, some treatment approaches that will praise when they don't stutter, and they will correct when they stutter. You doing that until they are like 6 years old, And then when they see they continue, well, now it's time to accept your stuttering. Like, how confusing is that? If you have been
Exactly.
saying that it's wrong for years, and then, okay, because you are still gonna have it, let's accept it. That gives
Right?
already a deep message on, in their heads that that is wrong. Um, and I think it's just, I mean, even for respect, just help the kids to be okay with that part of themselves, since they are little, and then it's gonna be even easier if a kid is 3 4 years old and is able to say, yeah, there's nothing wrong on me, this is the way that I talk, and we continue that work, and parents keep maintaining that message over the years, then when the kid is getting older, it's gonna be amazing. um and here, because there are also SLPs that watch these videos, of course, could you give us a broad overview of how an assessment look like?
Yeah. So evaluating preschoolers is fun because, they sometimes they need a little bit more time to warm up and talk to a stranger, which is very okay, right? But when I evaluate a preschooler, the first thing that I want to do is see the preschooler and their caregiver, their parent having a conversation or playing together or communicating together to just see, at a baseline, what do we have going on here? With the child specifically, I want to get to talk to them and learn more about their communication, right? Can I learn about what their stuttering sounds like, how they act in the moment of stuttering? Maybe I'll even ask them if they can tell me something about the way that they talk or communicate. I also like to use the kitty cat, which is the standardized assessment for children between ages 3 and 6. I like the kitty cat because it's neutral and it doesn't use the word stuttering. So for children who are coming to their first evaluation and the family hasn't talked to them about stuttering before, those questions are going to be accessible for them. So it'll ask things like, I like to talk, or talking is hard for me. So we can get a general sense of how they think or feel about stuttering, especially if stuttering isn't in their vocabulary yet. Um, in terms of assessment, because they're preschoolers and because it's during a critical period of speech and language development, I'll of course also do some speech or articulation and language assessment to look at some of those other areas. But for the child, it's really more, can I get to know their stuttering? Can I get to know how they think about their communication? And can I learn if they're aware of their stuttering? I also spend a lot of time with the parent or the caregiver to ask them things about when they first noticed stuttering, how people in the home talk about or react to stuttering, what their goals or what their questions are. And then I just ask some more questions to get to know their child, right? Through really the eyes of the parent. What are your child's strengths? And figure out what their hopes are for the evaluation and for treatment if they're interested in treatment.
Yeah. And here is also something that I have seen a lot of times in assessments, and it's this famous list of risk factors in preschool kids. I think I have seen more in the little ones. When they are 2.5, 3.5, they are just starting, and that speech therapist is debating do they do therapy or not, and then it's very common to go to this risk factors list. What can you tell us about that?
I mean, so I have stopped calling them risk factors, right? And so I know that there are certain variables or certain possible predictors of stuttering persistence versus stuttering remittance, right? So even eliminating the word risk keeps more of a neutral tone and neutral language when we're talking about stuttering and children who might continue to stutter and children who might not. But this list, it comes out of really a long-standing line of research where there's some data to suggest children who are male, who have a family history of stuttering, who have co-occurring communication concerns, like maybe they have a speech sound disorder or a language disorder, the amount of time that the child's been stuttering, all of those sorts of things can be considered in this list of predictors of stuttering persistence. Um, I always like to highlight Dr. Kara Singer when I talk about this because she's done some of the more recent work in these factors associated with stuttering persistence. And she's done some really lovely statistical work looking at how we can make predictions about who might or might not continue to stutter. Ultimately, the takeaways are that there's no formula, there's no algorithm that tells us your child is 30% likely to, 70% likely to. Right? We can't predict an individual child's outcome. And the reason I like to highlight Dr. Kara Singer is because she is a person who stutters herself, and she's someone who didn't have those factors for stuttering persistence, right? She's a woman, she didn't have a family history of stuttering, all these different things, and yet she is an adult who stutters and is now a researcher and a speech language pathologist with expertise in stuttering.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is really, really important because I think that I have um seen how very important decisions are taken on that, which I am not saying that it is not okay to try to see what the possibilities are, but I think there's a, like a line between exploring that and getting attached to it.
Right. And I think it's important to know when we paint a picture of the child's communication, right? How long have they been stuttering? Is
Yeah.
there a family history of stuttering? But to me, those aren't really things where I'm going to decide whether or not to treat based on them. Really, it's how am I going to talk about stuttering and might it be different? If a
Yeah.
child comes in and they have a parent who stuttered as a child, or they have a parent who stutters now, right? That parent's experience might influence what they think about their child stuttering. And so that adds an additional layer of counseling I want to provide to that parent. And I want them to know that their child's experience is going to be distinct from their own experience. And it's important when we're working with preschoolers who stutter themselves, right? Like, what's our expectation for that child? It's specific to that child. And we don't want to have an expectation that the parent has that their child will or will not continue to stutter based on what happened with them because they're a different person. And stuttering is so complex. There are a lot of variables involved that it's not necessarily going to be the same outcome for the parent as it is for the child that we're working with right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I like those things that you mentioned because it's a lot about it's important to know what characteristics this kid has, but also thinking on the therapy in the long term. I was, for example, when you mentioned if there's any history, I also like to explore that to see, okay, are there any, I don't know, if the mom says that she is a person who stutters, I also want to explore a bit on what is a relationship of the mom with her own stuttering, because that of course is going to impact the way she relates to the stuttering of the kid. And so I think there are also many, many more ways that we can, in which we can use that information. And it's a lot not about being rigid of, okay, like a checklist. These are the things, then the kid should go, not should go. It's more like, let's explore this, but also observing all different angles and what are the things we can do in therapy with this information.
Exactly, exactly. And when parents come for therapy or they want therapy for their child, they might start out wanting their child to stop stuttering, or they might start out wanting to help their child communicate easier, for example, right? But I think when parents learn more about stuttering and they can learn about stuttering in a neutral or even a positive way, their goals might shift so that, oh, well, if stuttering, I've learned stuttering isn't really a problem. If my child continues to stutter, I know they'll be okay. And if they don't continue to stutter, I learned something about stuttering. Great. Right.
And
So if I meet someone else who stutters later on, and that's relevant to the parent or to the child, right? If the child learns about stuttering in therapy as a preschooler or a kindergartner and they continue to stutter, then great. They learned some good information about stuttering. And if they don't continue to stutter, they just happen to be more educated and might, be a great conversationalist with someone who stutters that they happen to meet in the future.
yeah, exactly. And I think that in that I will only add that it is also important, I'm so sure you also agree with that, not wait until the kid passes that age in which they are gonna see if they continue or not. Because that is something that I have seen a lot of doctors, pediatricians recommending, let's wait until the kid is 6 to finally, or 7 to finally receive therapy after has passed the age period of if they will continue or not. And I think it's a lot about if if we see that a kid experience some stuttering events, and I mean the parents bring them for a reason, right? So it's like we can start helping as much as needed. Some parents will need just little or less support from us, others more. But I think that there are always things we can do.
Exactly, exactly. And really waiting leaves the opportunity for children to have a negative communication experience, right? So their dentist or their pediatrician or their aunt who's in from out of town, right, has some kind of negative reaction to their stuttering. Or maybe they just don't know that the child stutters and they ask a question about their stuttering. And if no one has talked to the child about stuttering before, how is that child going to feel and how are they going to react? But if right at the time of the evaluation, we start therapy with the goal of teaching the child more about stuttering and building up their resilience and their advocacy skills and building up, a neutral to positive feeling about stuttering, then that child's ready for whatever reaction they receive, throughout their different communication contexts. And one thing that I always really impress upon parents, right? Parents want to do the best they can for their child. And in the preschool years, the parents, this depends on people's socioeconomic status and work and family dynamics and cultural dynamics. But when children are younger, they might have the opportunity to spend more time with their parents. And as they get older, they're in preschool, they're in daycare or nursery, right? And so parents can't be next to their child at all times to protect them from how people are going to react to their stuttering. But we can talk to children about stuttering to make them ready, even when their parents not around to help or support them.
Exactly. And that includes different things like if was that a curious question or was that a question with different intention and many things that we can work in therapy.
Yeah.
Time flies. Before we finish this conversation, I just wanted to ask you if you can share a message to SLPs working with preschool kids. What would you like SLPs that work with preschool kids to know?
I mean, I would want them to know that there's a stuttering affirming or disability affirming approach that they can be using in their therapy. And I think that for SLPs, if they feel uncomfortable working with stuttering, I would want them to reflect on how comfortable they are with stuttering at all, right? So I've been working with folks who stutter for years and years and years, right? I feel comfortable around stuttered speech. I love talking to my friends and my colleagues and my mentors who stutter. And for the SLP who works with the preschooler who stutters, if they themselves aren't comfortable with the way that the child talks, it's going to be harder for them to provide that type of service. So I think it's important for us to do what we can do as clinicians to listen to people who stutter to get accustomed to what that speech sounds like so that we can do our best job when we have a client sitting across the table or sitting on the ground with us because preschool. So we can do the best by them.
Yeah, and I really like that because I feel like there is harm, there can be harm in speech therapy. And I feel that many times is when the SLP does not accept stuttering. And because the SLP, the one that is helping the kid or the teenager or the adult, is not accepting completely. And when I mean accept all the ways in which people stutter, not just accept when a person stutters a little or when a person stutters with no physical tension. It's about accepting every way in which people stutter with tension, with no tension, with different, etc., etc., etc. things. Um, And once the SLP can feel comfortable with all of the ways in which people can stutter, then they can provide a better speech therapy because then they feel really okay with it and not just with forms of it.
Exactly.
So I think that that is also a key. But well, time flies. I feel like this conversation can continue forever, but this video needs to have an end. So thank you so much, Katie. It's always nice to see you. And thank you for accepting this invitation.
No, thank you so much for extending the invitation. I loved getting to talk to you, and the conversation can continue in another part should we
Yeah,
feel it's necessary.
in another conference or
Exactly.
in another bars. Thank you so much, Katie. We'll
You're
keep in touch.
welcome. Thank you.